Welcome to talkSPORT MMA channel. I'm Jordan Ellis, and today it's my pleasure to be joined by MMA legend Randy Couture. How's it going, mate?
Going very well, thanks. How are you?
I'm very good as well. Very happy to be speaking with yourself. As we said off camera, I'm a big fan. I've been watching you for years, and now I'm watching the films and your work with PFL, and that's who we want to speak about or start to speak about today. I just want to learn a bit more about your role with PFL. Is there an official title? Do you have an official set of?
Part of the broadcast team. I guess you could call me a brand ambassador as well. They brought me in the rebranding year when they were the World Series of Fighting. They brought me in that year. They were rebranding. They got bought out, and we're in the process of refurbishing the company to the current format with the regular season and playoff and a championship every year. They brought me in for 5 shows to see if it was a good fit. Felt like a good fit to me, and they offered me a position in the broadcast team. So it's been a blast. We're going into our 7th season. Uh, been really good. Having a lot of fun watching the fighters embrace the grind and get after it. Seeing the iterations as we morph and change and become the organization that we become now. Those first 2 years, no women's weight classes, fighting twice in one night in the playoffs. There were some really interesting things in the early days of the PFL. I say that now we're 7 years in. It's kind of funny, but yeah, it's been a blast. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, for a lot of people watching outside who aren't necessarily, MMA hardcore fans, the PFL have just gotten started with this merger with Bellator. For you, being there from the ground up, what's it like to see how far they've come in that 7 years from what you've just said to, big shows in Saudis, mergers, all these
Yeah,
deals?
yeah, it's been very impressive to see everything unfold. Obviously, launching PFL Europe last year, and now in its second season, PFL Europe, and I think just now launching PFL MENA, Middle East and North Africa. I think next season you'll see Latin America and Australia come on board, and those are kind of the regional feeder programs for the global product, which is our regular season, our playoff, and our championship every year. And then obviously with the acquisition of Bellator and 210 amazing fighters, many of them marquee names over the years through Bellator and Scott Coker. Um, that's going to fill in that highest level where we see the champions versus champion fights and the pay-per-view model and kind of that top tier of the absolute cream of the crop coming out of the Professional Fighters League from all the regional shows through the global championship and into the pay-per-view model. So I think that's how it's structured. It's very interesting. Obviously, the meritocracy of the global season is what I really love. It's not about talking smack or publicity stunts or any of that. It's literally about going up in that cage and scoring criteria points and winning fights to get into the playoffs and have a shot at that $1 million in that championship. It's going to be interesting to see how the pay-per-view model unfolds and what those contracts look like and how that structure is set up with rankings and how they determine who gets a shot at fighting who. I love the champions versus champions thing. I think that's something that obviously I aspired for, trying to make the Fedor fight happen back in the day and cross over with Bride. And finally, we get to see two top organizations with top fighters fight, their champions versus the other guy's champions. And I thought that was an amazing show in Riyadh. They did a great job.
Absolutely, and you touched on a couple of things that I did want to ask you about there because the $1 million tournament is something that brings a lot of attention to PFL. And I'm just wondering, as an ex-fighter, how would you have embraced that type of situation, competing for that amount of money every year?
Well, I think uh, I would have been all over that. Obviously it's a tall order to fight 4 times in 8 months. Turning around every 8 weeks and fighting again. That means you got to manage your camps a little bit differently. I actually did that at the end of my career. I was the most active I think I was in my entire 14-year career in that last contract in those last 5 or 6 fights. I shortened my camps. I had to manage the injuries and manage conditioning and everything else a little bit differently when you're turning around and being as active as these guys are doing now. So I understand it. I think if I was a younger man, I'd be all over it for sure.
Yeah, and also talking about the pay-per-view model and branching into that side of things. PFL have been making waves. They've been signing big names. You know, Francis Ngannou, Jake Paul. They're not exactly part of the roster yet. They haven't fought. When you look at the rosters of PFL and Bellator, who stands out to you in terms of these could be the next pay-per-view thing?
Well, obviously, you've got guys like Johnny Eblen and on down the line uh, that are amazing fighters, uh, well established marquee names that were selling a lot of pay per views and a lot of tickets and all that for Bellator. And we absorbed those athletes. We saw Eblen look great against Impa Kasanganay in the Champions versus Champions show. He was in trouble there, and I don't think he's been in that situation very often. So, obviously Bader and Henan Ferreira. I mean, Henon's such a beast right now. Changing camps and coming to top team and kind of shoring up some of the potential holes in his game. As physical as he is, as athletic as he is, he's going to be tough for anybody to deal with, and I think he showed that in the Bader fight. But you know, Ryan's another one of those great names. Just because he lost that fight doesn't mean he goes away. He's still been a solid performer, first two division champ in Bellator. There's a lot of names just like that that are going to be fun to watch at that pay-per-view model, champions versus champions, and all the stuff that unfolds here in this next year. I think we're looking at seeing Francis hopefully back in and coming back to the Smart Cage in September potentially. I'm hearing, so we'll see. Haven't seen Francis back at Extreme yet. He's been hanging out in Dubai. Is my understanding. So I'm sure once he's got a fight staring him in the face, he's going to be coming back and getting back into camp and getting back into shape and ready to fight again.
Yeah, and while we're on Francis, I've got to ask you about that last performance. Obviously, he did so well against Tyson Fury, and then it didn't go right against Anthony Joshua. What did you make of that? Was that just kind of a bridge too far type situation, or was it just a bad
Uh,
night at the office?
I think it appeared to me, and I was at the Tyson Fury fight with Francis, and he did an amazing job. He looked phenomenal. It appeared to me that maybe Tyson Fury didn't take the fight as seriously as he maybe should have until he got knocked out his ass in the third round, and then he realized, oh God, this guy can really hit. Now this is a real match. Um, that may have given Francis a little false sense of his abilities and where he was at, certainly in the boxing world. Going into the fight with Anthony Joshua, who's just coming off of a very big win. He looks very sharp. He did not underestimate Francis Ngannou at all. He took the camp very seriously. He came out with guns ablazing. And I think that was the difference in the two performances in the two fights. The end of the day, MMA and boxing are they're apples and oranges in many, many ways. And when you can punch, kick, knee, elbow, take somebody down, striking changes, tactically and technically striking changes a lot with all those other layers to the onion in MMA. And we've been criticized by boxers forever about our striking and the way our striking looks. And it's not the same as boxing, pure striking sport like boxing, or even kickboxing for that matter, because of all those other attributes and tactical engagement rules. So it is what it is. We're seeing a lot of the crossover fights, seeing some of the MMA guys come over to some of these crossover boxing matches. Some of them doing all right, some of them not faring so well. Uh, you know, I haven't really seen any solid boxers coming the other way, coming back over into MMA. There's been a lot of talk about it. The only one that's really done it has been James Toney, obviously. That was a fight I was involved in back in '08. He's the only top flight, top level boxer that we've seen cross over. I think Jake Paul's certainly got his hands full with Mike Tyson, even at 59. Mike is as explosive as he ever was, and there's a whole lot of other things that are gone from Mike's life, and Mike's firing on all cylinders now. I think he's going to be very tough to deal with for Jake, but it's going to be interesting. I think a lot of people are going to tune in to see that as well. So there's this interesting back and forth between boxing and mixed martial arts, and and again, I think at the end of the day, they're apples and oranges. They're very, very different sports.
Yeah, and just touching Jake Paul, Mike Tyson, there has been quite a lot of. It's been a divisive subject. Because he is 30 years older than Jake Paul, and you're about the same age. If you were getting called out right now by someone like Jake or someone from that world, what would your reaction be to that?
Well, I'd have to consider it. Certainly, as far as a legacy and taking care of my family, a lot of that's been set. I'm not too worried. I wouldn't be too worried about that. I think there's a little more at stake here for Mike. I think Mike sees some of these crossover fights and what's going on and how that's affecting boxing and people's perception of boxing. And if you take him at his word, he wants to kind of straighten some of that rhetoric out and say, hey, that this isn't as easy as Jake Paul's making it look. Boxing is, he's fighting for boxing in many ways against what many call a YouTuber or, a social media guy that has made his way. And I'll give Jake credit. He's backed it up. He's fought well. He showed some skills. He certainly has some ability. I got to respect anybody that's willing to get in that ring or that cage and step out there. So, in that regard, I think he's doing a great thing. He's certainly not shy about poking Dana White in the chest about fighter pay and some of the other issues in our sport as we start to compare and contrast boxing and MMA as well. So, all those things are positives. It's going to be interesting to see how that fight unfolds. I mean, watching the training footage of Mike Tyson, you have flashbacks of him in his prime, and it's pretty scary, pretty remarkable.
Yeah, while we're on crossover fights, you did touch on it there. James Toney. Conor McGregor likes to take credit for starting this kind of crossover craze, but the first one I remember was you against James Toney, and it was kind of it was just a new thing when it happened to you, and I'm just curious as what your reaction was when this got put to you by the UFC. Did you jump at it? Was you like, "What's going on?" I'm not
Oh yeah,
sure.
I was absolutely excited to get the nod. I think they were originally talking to Chuck Liddell about that fight, and I think Chuck may have tried to stand and prove a point with James and try to box with James. And I think that probably would have been a mistake, which was, I think, why they ended up coming to me and asking me because of my wrestling background and my style of mixed martial arts. It was probably a better fit for me to fight a guy like James Toney. I wasn't going to play around with James. I respect his boxing. I've seen him win 6 world championships, that shoulder roll, that left hook. Those are real. And he is a very, very skilled boxer. The real question was how much MMA was James going to be able to learn in 4 months? And I think we answered that question pretty quickly in about a minute and 42 seconds. Not that much MMA. He let me take him right down. He let me climb right to mount. And then the fight was over in pretty short order. But James was the first one to have the stones, frankly, to step up and cross over. Yeah, Conor stepped up and crossed over into boxing against Floyd. Uh, Interesting to me, they had a full camp and he still managed to get tired in that fight. Why? How? How does that happen? If you had a full camp, I don't understand. So he also had the opportunity in taking that fight and getting a boxing license to shine a light on the disparaging difference in pay and fighter structure and all those things in our contracts in MMA that are different than boxing, and why boxing and boxers are able to make so much more money off of a single boxing match than a mixed martial artist. And Conor could have effectively changed our sport with the leverage that he had at that time through the Mayweather fight. He chose to keep that bridge and not burn the bridge with the UFC, bring them in, allow them to make some money off of that fight, and allow him to do that crossover match. And in doing so, allowed them to also continue to do business the way they've been doing business for a long time, which, he had an opportunity to change the sport for the better for fighters, and he chose not to do that. So, I mean, that's the reality of the situation. It was a fun fight, a lot funner than I thought it was going to be. I thought Mayweather would have. Mayweather's not a knockout guy. I didn't expect Mayweather to come out and try and knock Conor out, and I thought Conor accounted for himself very well in that fight. It was a lot more entertaining than I thought it might be.
And do you ever think about what would have happened if James Toney did go in with someone like Chuck Liddell and knock him out? How much would that set back the sport of MMA? Because obviously boxing can take these knocks. It's an older sport. MMA was still on the rise at that point when you fought him. How damaging would it have been? Do you think?
I don't think it would have been damaging. I don't think MMA is going anywhere. I don't think one fight like that would have made a difference in the sport of mixed martial arts. I don't think MMA is going anywhere. It's well established. I think it's the combative sport for this generation, these generations now that are in the mix and coming up now. And people are a little disenchanted with boxing. Some of the disparaging decisions. It seems boxers don't seem to fight the same way they used to in the golden era of boxing. Hagler, Hearns, all those guys went out to rip a guy's head off. They did not care about winning rounds. They were out to knock you out. And it seems like boxers now are more interested in making sure they don't have that O on their record, and they don't go out and fight the same way. That's just my observation. But and then so who really won that fight? I thought that guy won the fight, and then the decision from the judges goes a completely different way, and everybody's like, "What the hell? What fight were they watching?" So there's issues in both sports. I think we're having some growing pains in MMA, fastest growing sport on the globe. I think there's some contract and pay issues that we as fighters need to come together and address. There's a structure issue in our sport. The promoter should be setting rankings and determining who gets a shot at his title. That's too much power. That's a flaw in the structure in mixed martial arts. They separated rankings from boxing. The boxing promoters don't have any sway in who gets ranked what and who gets that shot at the title. And that's kind of the way it should be. The promoter doing all of that is way too much power and leverage over the fighters. Very restrictive contracts, no transparency. Nobody knows how much these promoters are making off any given fight. So how's a fighter supposed to negotiate his fair value in the marketplace if nobody knows how much money the promoter just made off that fight I fought on? That's the issues in our sport right now.
Absolutely, and as you said, we're still a growing sport, so hopefully all these can be ironed out in the not too distant future. I can't have Randy Couture on and not ask him about some of these big fights you've had over the years. Our fans are always curious to hear from people like yourself. Who was the toughest opponent you faced when you look back now? I know you've faced so many. Does anyone stand out?
Man, every single one of them was tough. Obviously, the toughest fight I think I was in was the first time I fought Pedro Hizzo. That was a brawl, back and forth, 5-round battle. I won 3 of the 5 rounds, but I broke my nose. I got kicked in the leg about 14 times in that fight. I didn't walk right for 6 weeks after that fight. That was a very tough fight. Certainly, that one sticks out to me, and that's the first fight my mom attended in person. But that one always sticks out to me as one of the toughest fights I was in. They were still using pyro, walking out of the tunnel and all that, all the smoke and pyro. And I think that I felt like, I got uncommonly tired for me. That's the most tired I think I've ever been in a fight. Only one other time. And I think I had a staph infection in the Van Arsdale fight. And I don't think I've ever been as tired as I was in that fight. But, yeah, I was happy to see them do away with the pyro and all that and not have all that smoke and stuff in the arena. It was so hazy in that arena. I thought it was just me, but everybody else was like, "Oh no, it's really smoky in here. It's hazy in here."
And who hits hardest? Again, loads of legends you've been in there. Is anyone just
Only been
trapped here
knocked
in this?
out once. I mean, Chuck Liddell's the only guy that ever really knocked me out. I got flashed by Chuck in the third fight, but that second fight, man, I lost a little piece of time. That's the only time I've ever really been knocked out, was that second fight with Chuck Liddell. I got flashed against Brock. But again, that's one of those situations where you get hit, and the second your butt hits the canvas, you know exactly where you're at. You're wide awake and you're back in the fight. But the only time I've ever been really knocked out was that second Chuck Liddell fight.
And just to switch lanes a little bit, you have had a successful career in acting besides MMA, and for me, it doesn't seem like a natural fit. But we do see a lot of fighters gravitate towards the acting side of things from someone who's done both.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think that is?
I think mixed martial artists bring a certain physicality and character to the acting world, and obviously Rampage Jackson had some big roles. Mike Pyle, Jay Haran. There's a number of fighters that have been getting some roles in movies. Obviously, Conor just getting the nod. Ronda Rousey been in a couple films. So I think there's a natural physicality that comes when you put a mixed martial artist in a situation like that. It's a weird thing. We're used as athletes boxing up our emotions, putting them to the side, compartmentalizing, and staying laser focused on exactly what we train to do. Now they want you to walk in front of a camera and let all that stuff out and find a way to represent a character and say and do things you would never do in real life. It's a very interesting process, and it's fun. Certainly a lot easier way to make a living than getting punched in the face, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I can imagine. And you touched on Conor McGregor there. He's just had a massive film come out. It broke all records on Amazon and he got rave reviews. I'm just wondering if you've seen it and what you make of his acting chops.
I haven't gotten to see it yet. Obviously, Jay Haran's a very close friend of mine, one of the OG fighters at Extreme Couture when we launched the gym here in Las Vegas back in '07. Him and Mike Pyle both. And both of those guys have gotten some acting gigs and are doing some acting. Jay has a prominent role. Jake does. Jay Haran does it with Jake Gyllenhaal. He's the one that fights Jake Gyllenhaal in the MMA matches in that. And I want to see it just to support Jay, but I haven't gotten a chance. I've been so busy with the PFL and everything else in the last 3 or 4 weeks that I haven't gotten a chance to see it yet.
Absolutely, it's a great film. And then just finally from me, I just want to ask you about the Expendables because you came up from the MMA in infancy. Then the next thing you're working on all these big films with these, Sly Stallone, movie stars like that. What's that transition been like for yourself, going from a fighter to mixing with these A-listers?
Yeah, it's been interesting. That process started for me in the early 2000s. I got the nod to be in Cradle to the Grave. So did Chuck and Tito. Chuck and Tito were in those underground fight scenes in Cradle to the Grave with Jet Li and DMX as well. That was kind of my first feature film and had one line in the movie. But it was very interesting. It took us a week of 12, 14-hour days to film that 1 5-minute clip, that 1 5-minute underground fight scene in that film. So it was very interesting. I was intrigued immediately with the process of making movies. I've always been a movie goer, never saw myself as an actor or being in movies, but it's been a very fun transition, a very interesting process. Like I said, finding a way to tap into your own stream of experience to relate to a character that they want you to portray, which is completely imaginary. So a director's job is to create, this imaginary world that's believable enough so that you can find a way to tell the truth in representing that character and doing and saying the things that guy does. That's the knack, and that's not an easy thing to do.
On AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app, and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.